Hello, and welcome to the Above Average Podcast, the only AA meeting worth attending and the only refuge for those of the slightly above average abilities. I'm your host, Lake, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Tanim. Tanim, how you doing?
Good, and you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Certainly better than the currently unemployed Gina Carano. Sorry, Carano. I haven't been able to figure that out.
You must be a fan of hers.
You know what? Deadpool. I enjoyed her in Deadpool, but what I want to talk about is not necessarily the reason why she was fired or whether or not it was justified. What I want to talk about more is kind of the consequences of it. So my own theory of what people call cancel culture is that there's two different ways to view freedom of speech issues generally. The first is that is the marketplace of ideas theory, which is that it doesn't matter if people express hateful views or what you might call hateful views, because views that are the best will naturally work their way to the top, essentially. And um, people who have wrong views will, if they have the freedom to express them, then um, people will see them for what they are, which is wrong. And then, um, more importantly, other people who are right and are against racism or whichever also have the freedom to say, this is racist, this is wrong, etc. And not, but essentially, in the end, the right side will win out in the marketplace of ideas. The other theory is the theory of deplatforming, which is that, it kind of comes from the fear of fake news, which is it doesn't matter whether something is right or not. The more a view is expressed, the more it's given legitimacy. And therefore, it's our responsibility to remove resources from those who express those views, right, so that those views are expressed less and those views disappear. So, which I'm sympathetic to the latter just because, what we see from fake news, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. If you're loud enough, you can kind of dominate the conversation with a view that's
and control
wrong.
The narrative. Yep.
So, exactly. And we see this in settings where the media is dominated by a few privately owned entities. So even if you ostensibly have free speech and free press, countries where the media is controlled by a single company,
more say or influence.
Yeah, exactly. And they can have the narrative restricted to their views, essentially. So what people call cancel culture is essentially from this view that the best thing to do is to deplatform these people, like make sure they don't have the resources to express their views. So what I wanted to talk about is kind of an unintended consequence of getting people fired for expressing certain views on social media is that you might have the power to deplatform someone from one media company that cares about a certain market, but once you have a company that doesn't care about offending a certain demographic or doesn't care that you express these views, then you don't really have the power to do that. And the consequence could be that you end up with people who have certain views or far right views will end up consolidating their resources and creating their own media, which some people might think is a good thing, because it has less resources and can reach a more limited audience. The problem with it is that it becomes more extreme, and it means people with far right views can have access to only far right media and can put themselves in kind of an echo chamber in which they don't get exposed to alternative viewpoints.
Pizzagate?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Pizzagate. So like, normal sane people have never heard, like, didn't know what the hell was going on with Pizzagate because they weren't part of that echo
Yep.
chamber. And so some people say attribute political polarization to the politicization of media, where people can shelter themselves from alternative viewpoints. Whereas, before, everyone across the country watched Walter Cronkite for their news. So it, you had a situation where, like, everyone of all views watched the same news and could therefore theoretically be exposed to new information. But if you only watch Fox News or or read the Huffington Post, then you're kind of isolated from that.
Right.
And you can it can dehumanize your enemies, so to speak. So the prominent example I wanted to use of that, and this is where, like, the idea of canceling someone kind of loses its teeth, is, Ben Shapiro is, right?
Yep.
So yeah, for those who don't know, Ben Shapiro is a conservative American political commentator. Sounds like a complete wiener, but that's neither here nor there. So he's founded this media company called The Daily Wire, and there's a movie called Run, Hide, Fight, and the Daily Wire used to just be kind of an online news organization that politically slanted to the right, and but now he's started investing in movies and started investing in media. And the first such example is this movie called Run, Hide, Fight. And Run, Hide, Fight is a rather controversial film because it's an action thriller about a school shooting. There have been movies about school shootings in the past. You have movies like Elephant from 2003 and Polytechnique by my favorite director, Denis Villeneuve. But they're very artsy movies, and they're certainly not action thrillers. So, but this is sort of a Die Hard, but during a school shooting, and there's some clear influences from Columbine. Otherwise, it's not especially political. It's not especially right wing or left wing. It's just that no one wants to touch this film. Like, how like movies get made, but no one agreed to distribute
Yeah.
them.
Was this based on a true story?
Sorry, it's not based on a true story at all. So it's an entirely fictional
Right.
school shooting, but it clearly has some influences from, like, real life school shootings, like Columbine. But because there's bombs with timers on them, and there's shooting in the cafeteria and that sort of thing. But essentially, it's like the action thriller.
I really don't want to see.
So the action thriller element comes from the fact it's kind of like a revenge fantasy, like I Spit on Your Grave, where, like, a girl, like, fights
Yeah.
back and wins. What's your take on that? Like, do you think that's completely tasteless and it shouldn't be made?
I mean, I haven't seen
like
the film, but I mean, I guess it's his interpretation of a situation that can happen, and I guess it depends on if he's like a parody or if he's actually doing it in a serious manner. So I'd have to see it, but I mean, it depends on his take, because, like, if it's super, like, comedy action packed, you can kind of believe, like, take that element of, like, this is actually can happen. Whereas if it's super serious, it's not based on anything, then people can get offended.
Okay, so you think, like if they made it so ridiculous that it obviously wasn't based on real life, like, it would make it less offensive,
Yeah,
less
I mean,
tasteless.
people wouldn't be
in
as
people's
offended.
view?
What was that war movie with Robert Downey Jr. and he was like a blackface,
Oh, Tropic Thunder.
totally comical, kind of not realistic depiction of like a
Okay.
war type film.
Yeah, and it's also like a movie. It's like they're filming a war movie within the movie.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a tricky subject because, like, there's obviously tragedies that have been turned into movies, and people make money off of that. Like, Steven Spielberg directed Schindler's List, which, on the one hand, like, yeah, it's necessary that people know what happened, and media is an important part of that. but it's not an easy question to answer whether or not it's right to make money off other people's tragedies.
Right.
Yeah, because because that is what you're doing in it.
Right. I mean, I guess it depends on his take on why he's doing it. Is he just doing it to get the message out and letting people know
Yeah.
what happened?
Oh yeah, no, that's sorry, you're talking about
Yeah,
Schindler's
yeah,
List. Okay, yeah, yeah. No, because I think that was his intention. I think his intentions were good, but um, uh, going back to like the other two movies I know of about school shootings, they're quite well done, quite serious movies.
yeah,
Like Elephant won a Palme d'Or, and Polytechnique is very well received. So I think there's like, I think to some extent, there's an idea that like a movie about a tragedy has to be a certain level of quality to like show respect to its victims, which is a little strange
right.
uh, to say out loud. That like it's offensive to make a bad movie about a tragedy, but it's not offensive to make a good movie about a tragedy. And that's kind of in my view, that's kind of where like people draw the line between like an artful movie and an exploitation
Yeah,
film, because an exploitation film is kind of just a B movie version about a tragedy like that. So you know you have movies like Ilsa She Wolf of the SS, which is guys kind of just trying to push the boundaries on what they can get away with the censors, and making a movie like making a gore film about the
yeah,
Holocaust. And it's you know, and I think that's where I think people think it becomes tasteless when it's ironic. Strangely enough, it's when it's not a great movie otherwise. Like when like the gore and tragedy of it all is meant to be like lurid, and it's meant to be the draw of the film itself, which I'm not getting that. I'm not getting that impression of Run Hide Fight. I'm getting more of an impression that it's like a bank robbery, and like he's treating it as a bank robbery, like it's just another setting to put an action film
right,
in, which you know you could argue that school shootings are a real problem, and you know it's offensive to make movies about it that kind of make action fun out of it. But like bank robberies are also real. People get killed in bank robberies every year, and we don't really have the same thought about it. And you know, maybe that's maybe we're wrong for
bank
not seeing.
robbers the same way.
Yeah, maybe we're wrong for not viewing people who die in other crimes as seriously. But maybe like maybe we have like some kind of
Desensitized.
maybe we're desensitized, or maybe it's just you know in The Dark Knight where Heath Ledger says people only lose their minds on something when it's not part of the plan. Like you know maybe, and I guess that is just a product of desensitization. Like we don't really think of bank robberies as like this great moral wrong you can't make movies about because we're desensitized to it, because it's what's supposed to happen, quote
Right.
unquote. Whereas like you know school shootings are kind of seen as an aberrant tragedy. But and then maybe this movie is wrong because it's normalizing school shootings in the same
Is it
way
bank robbery?
we've
Yeah.
done to bank robberies. Yeah, like it's making it ingrained in our popular consciousness to the extent that we think it's okay to make action movies about it. So maybe this movie is wrong, but besides, so whether or not it's wrong, a great deal of movie studios think it's wrong or think it will reflect badly on them to distribute the movie. And I've talked before about movies that kind of fly under the radar because they didn't get distributors. Like they got made, but they didn't get distributors. So like, you ever see the movie Shot
No.
Caller? Shot Caller, by every right, should have been a hit because it had Jamie Lannister from Game of Thrones, it had Bill Tench from Mindhunters, and it had the dude from Frank Castle from Punisher. Like it had three like great TV leading men in it, but I don't think anyone wanted to touch it because it's about neo-Nazi prison
Okay.
gangs. So
Yeah.
it was not well distributed, but it's it's a good movie, and it had lots of star power, but so it kind of flew under the radar as a result. So movies can kind of like go away, can get made but never get released because no one wanted to
Who
distribute them.
distributed
And
this movie?
oh yeah, so that's where I'm going with this. So no one wanted to distribute this movie. So remember I mentioned before Ben Shapiro had created his media company, The
Yeah.
Daily Wire. The Daily Wire has acquired the distribution rights to run
Okay,
Hyde
so they're
Fight.
doing it themselves.
Exactly. So what he's claiming, oh, it's a good, clean action movie without any liberal propaganda, that sort of thing. But what I think he's doing is, and what this is like an early sign of, is I think he's weaseling his way into everything Hollywood, mainstream Hollywood,
Going
won't
against the
touch.
grain.
And he's trying to, exactly, like he's trying to carve out a niche for himself where other film studios
Right.
won't touch. And that kind of comes to canceling, so getting someone fired from a movie can only go so far, because where this story gets interesting is, guess where Gina Carano says she's going to work after she's been fired from The Mandalorian? The Daily Wire. She has a new film project with the conservative media company, The
Well, I'm
Daily
sure no one
Wire.
really wants
So,
to hire what you said, but I mean, like, or they're taking a
uh,
stance on like
well, yeah,
let the water clear until we can get this settled with.
yeah. So, whereas like, but what seems to be happening is like before, when celebrities kind of had a social media outrage against them, they would, kind of lay low for a little bit, and then, their salaries get lower, and then like the movie studios start, hiring them again, and figured like
Right.
everyone's forgotten. So, and the power of people forgetting is significant because Gina can't get work because of social media posts, but Mark Wahlberg is one of the biggest leading men in Hollywood, and he committed a hate crime in his youth. He blinded a Vietnamese man, like as a hate crime when he was younger, and I would argue that's uncontroversially a
No,
worse
no one
thing to
remembers
do.
that.
But yeah, exactly. It's not about whether it's better or worse. It's about whether or not people remember, because like the movie studios don't care. Like they don't actually care. They care
They
about
care about the numbers and
um,
people
they
watching the
care
film.
about image. Exactly. So like this all needs to be seen like from the perspective of marketing, where so like what Ben Shapiro is seeing is essentially like there's that these celebrities or these movies are undervalued by social media outrage. So he's acquiring. So I think he's acquiring them, or maybe I'm giving him too much credit, but he's acquiring them while they're down. So presumably he can get these celebrities and get
While they're
these
cheap.
actors and get these
Yeah.
movie scripts and these distribution rights for pennies on the dollar, and essentially carve out his niche as the media entity that takes what everyone else doesn't want to touch. But what I could see happening here is, as an unforeseen consequence of deplatforming, is that they just create new platforms. So, in much the same way, the country music industry operates kind of differently from the rest of the music
Yeah.
industry, right? Yeah, like it's based in Nashville. It has different studios. It has like different awards, like that. People who aren't into country music might not have even heard of. Like we had to look this up just before the show, like what the Grammys equivalent of country music was,
CMAs.
and I think it's yeah the CMAs, and they're huge. Like I think like country music's the biggest music genre in the country, but or in the U.S. anyway. But if you're kind of outside that cultural bubble, you don't know anything about it. So what I could see happening is like Ben Shapiro and others could start this like parallel Hollywood. And speaking of which, you know, country music is based in Nashville and all of the music's based in Los Angeles. Guess where the Daily Wire is based? Nashville, Tennessee. You know, as though the allegory wasn't so perfect. Yeah, so what I can see happening is like essentially like a parallel right wing Hollywood. Before, right wing Hollywood was kind of just like limited to kind of low budget, heaven is for real, religious movies, specifically Christian movies, and I'm sure they're reasonably popular among a certain demographic, but this could be an expansion of it,
Right.
like beyond religious dramas. It could see this parallel Hollywood dip its toes into secular action
Right.
films. So, and that's kind of the danger of this unforeseen danger of deplatforming, which is that, you know, now we're going to have like a right wing Hollywood. It's going to produce its own films, and then, you know, people from a certain section of the country are no longer are going to stop watching Hollywood movies. You know, they'll and then they'll only be exposed to like Nashville produced Ben Shapiro movies, and then they won't have any exposure to other ideas, and it will create this like this echo chamber problem with deplatforming, which is that you know, you force them into settings where they only talk to people with the same ideas, and they only consume media from people with the
Right.
same ideas. I understand why people think it needs to be done, deplatform people, but it I think it can only go so far in terms of like affecting social change, because as long as there's like a 40% of the population that would be willing to, you know, consume uh Daily Wire movies, then, you know, there's always going to be a market, and you're not actually going to financially hurt them. And there isn't actually going to be consequences in the end to, you know, saying tasteless social media posts, because they'll just go to Nashville, and go work for the Daily
Right.
Wire. And so it's not going to change things, I think, past a certain point. Like it's only going to it's only going to make it's only going to change people who already cared, like who don't want to be seen as racist or homophobic or whichever. That's so that it's not to say like it's necessarily wrong to deplatform people, but like we should probably question its
Right. I mean,
efficacy.
I don't know his motives, but I mean, I see it two ways. One way, I guess there could be like a lot of red tape with major studios. So like, obviously they're not going to
Oh, I'm sure.
distribute certain films that are of a certain topic. So he's just like, let me just do it on my own and see, play it by my rules, which gets it out there. But then on the flip side, showing, doing movies of a certain topic, there's a problem with that because maybe you end up only seeing one side.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, and you know, it could be interesting in a way, just because, as we see with Run Hide Fight isn't necessarily a political movie. It's just controversial because it kind of pushes the boundaries of what, you know, Hollywood considers
Right.
tasteful. And yeah, and it's not just that. So from a business perspective, you could carve out a niche for yourself, not just for political movies, but
TV
just for
show.
anything that Hollywood doesn't want to touch. Like remember before all the stuff about Louis C.K. came out, he had a movie, or he had a movie he was making. It was kind of like this early favorite for Oscar season. Unfortunately, for a number of reasons, seemed to be an homage to Woody Allen films. The movie was called "I Love You, Daddy," which is, you know, gross and weird. given the context of everything. But the reviews of it aren't great. But I cannot tell if it's I cannot tell if this is like pre or post. If this is pre or post.
Cancelled.
Yeah. So the reviews of it are not good, but like, who knows? If nothing happened, then people could have shamelessly said, "Oh, I love this film. It's the greatest film since Woody Allen." I've never actually seen it because it's was never released, and it's very hard to get a hold of. So I'll have to see it at some point. But my point is that like beyond political films, there's this whole cache of films that you could distribute were you unconcerned with the backlash, the social media
Yep.
backlash of it. So there's definitely a market for this uh, beyond politics, but like given the structure of what happened with the film Run Hide Fight, it's that you get a film that's not political but is otherwise controversial won't be distributed, and it's made political by it being distributed through the Daily Wire. Like Ben Shapiro puts his conservative twist on it, says it's something free of liberal propaganda, whatever he wants to say about it, and then distributes it, and then the film takes on a politicization that is weirdly added by the distributor and not the creator of the film, which is it's a strange thing because normally that doesn't happen. Normally, like distributors are kind of just in the background. Like you think Disney or Warner Brothers, oh, they're evil and terrible, and they do this, and that. Um, but no one remembers who the distributor of like a particular movie is in most cases. Like you won't remember that Columbia Pictures did The Godfather or Fox did American History X, that sort of thing. Like before this, it was not
Right.
really an issue. So, but it's probably going to become an issue
You usually
going
remember the
forward.
actors.
Like exactly, you remember the actors, and maybe if you're like a film nerd, like a moderate film nerd like me, you remember the director and the cinematographer. Like even like I'm not a big enough film nerd to remember the
Call
distributor.
yourself a film nerd.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm definitely not that level. Yeah, it adds this layer. It colors the narrative in an interesting way because like the guy who wrote this film and the guy who directed this film didn't know who his distributor was going to be when he made the film. Like he'd already finished it by the time the Daily Wire picked it up. And I don't know what Kyle Rankin, the guy who created it, I don't know his political views. There's nothing really on that anywhere. But for all I know, he could just be like a guy looking to make a buck, and Ben Shapiro's offering him a lot of money, and he just wants his movie
Right.
released. But yeah, it's interesting that like a distributor can add a political dimension to that wasn't there before. So it's adding it's adding dimensions to the story after the story has been finished, which I think is odd. Yeah, like because I think given that's my prediction of what happened. In some ways, there's been increasing pressure on companies to take sides in political fights. But on the other hand, like they're probably just doing this of their own volition, like because they think like Nike's thinking like, oh, if we side with Colin Kaepernick, then it's going to generate positive publicity for us. It's not that the general public said like you need to side with Colin Kaepernick on the issue of kneeling at the at in the
Right.
NFL, but and you have corporations kind of dominating the narrative of activism or trying to, and it kind of brings up weird questions about if the evil overlords of society have taken over activism, then what does
To
it
be
mean?
activism.
to be an activist. Yeah, like Coca-Cola can say they're anti-racist all they want, but they're still happy to profiteer off racism. They're still happy to assassinate union reps in South America, but it's just good marketing for them. It's weird because like your impulse, and this is what they want, is that, oh, I have to side with Coca-Cola. I need to like support this business who's taken a stand that agrees with my views, but it's so poisoned by the entity itself. Like you're like Oreos being pro gay marriage doesn't, like, you aren't making the world better by buying Oreos because they support your views, and you're not making it worse by like not buying Oreos or boycotting them. Like you're just making more money for
What if they're
Oreos.
vanilla Oreos?
Man, that's so basic. You don't want to. You don't want to touch
What about
vanilla
double
Oreos.
stuffed?
Oh man, no, I'm a peanut butter
Right.
Oreos guy. Like just all
I
peanut
like the
butter
thin
everything.
ones.
Oh yeah, those are good. I like the ones that are like chocolate
Yeah.
coated. Yeah, those are the best. It's a weird time because like normally in a society that's deeply wrong, like all elements of the ruling hierarchy are united in what makes it wrong. So it's weird that when like an element of it decides that we're going to pay lip service to it aggressively, as a means of maintaining our power. Because on the one hand, like you don't want to say like you don't want to say like racism is good because Coca Cola says it's bad and Coca Cola is bad, but like I don't I don't know that I feel that I think I I don't know that I want Coca Cola to stop doing what it's doing.
Yeah.
It just, but it does make me uncomfortable for its implications, that like they can like insincerely take up a cause. Maybe that doesn't matter. Like maybe their sincerity doesn't matter if like it moves mainstream society in a particular direction.
I mean,
I don't know.
definitely the public image of a company impacts them a lot. So
Yeah,
supporting certain causes definitely favors them.
yeah, and that's the part I struggle with. Like just that, like there's definite, like I know there's no sincerity to it, but like, and does it matter? Is it still good for society? Like even if like Coca Cola's intentions are evil, like maybe it's still good for society to like be less racist, even if it was Coca Cola that told them to do it, and like as a result, Coca Cola made more money. That's a tricky one.
Right. Because you don't know if they're sincere, but even if they
Oh, I
aren't,
know they're not sincere. Come on,
right.
come on. They don't give a shit. Like hell, if they were gonna make more money, like by like bringing George Wallace back from the dead, and like running commercials, Coca Cola commercials that are pro segregation, they
I
would
mean,
do that.
most corporations don't really care. They just want to seem like it to the public eye.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just like what would be most economically advantageous, and I think like a lot of companies see. I don't want to say they lean left, because not really. Prominently, more companies like support what some might call progressive causes, like whether they believe in them or not. And in that sense, because like there's a certain segment of the country that doesn't believe in those causes. Um, so you have like you know 40% of America still voted for Trump. So you know there's there's definitely a market for like telling those people like, yes, yes, liberal Hollywood is out to
Get
destroy
us.
your family and take your penis, and like just like indulge in the ridiculousness. What I think a lot of right wing media guys have discovered is like they can make a lot of money by filling that void. Ben Shapiro is kind of just taking it a step further from like, making videos on the internet about quote unquote owning libs and, turning it in and like turning it into a movie business. But I mean, I don't know how successful he's going to be at it,
He's
but
definitely fueling the fire.
yeah, like I know I like there has to be a market for it. Like there and it has to like and Republicans make more money than Democrats do. So there's definitely like a probably a like a hidden unexploited market for highly conservative media.
Oh yeah,
But
definitely.
yeah, but and on the other hand, like Hollywood media isn't nearly as liberal as
People think it
people
is.
say
No.
it is. Yeah, because like Clint Eastwood is one of the most respected directors in Hollywood, and he's deeply conservative. And a lot of his movies are like raw support the troops. Like I think it would be oversimplifying to say like they're jingoistic, but I watched something that was talking about what it meant to be an anti-war film, and they were saying like an anti-war film needs to subvert the idea that like your struggle and sacrifice is worth it, or that like accomplished something greater, and so to be an anti-war movie you need to subvert the hero narrative by like making the struggle seem pointless. And a lot of supposedly anti-war films like that are kind of seen as left wing don't really do that. So like Saving Private Ryan doesn't do that because it initially asks the question whether or not it's worth it to for like a group of men to sacrifice themselves to save another. But like with its ending, it answers that definitively. Yes, it is worth it. Therefore, support the troops.
But that's because they lived.
Um, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I guess that's true. You, we, yeah. No, I never thought about that. Like we only we only ever hear war stories from people who survived, so we
I
can
mean, if
only
all
ask.
those guys died to save that one dude and they all died, it would be pointless. Like,
Yeah. So like from his perspective, it's worth it. From Private Ryan's perspective, it's worth it because he's alive, or he's more likely to say it's worth it. What I'm saying is like American Sniper doesn't necessarily subvert the idea that the sacrifice is worth it and you gain symbolic immortality by dying a hero's death because in the end he's well remembered because of what he did, even though he dies tragically. And then so in that sense it's not an anti-war film even though it's kind of about PTSD. And that's a fair enough criticism, but a lot of ostensibly left-wing films about like the Iraq war and Vietnam and that sort of thing or are still don't subvert that. The guy ended up saying that like the only anti-war movie he likes is the movie Come and See, but even that's like a little triumphalist at the end. So, but my point is that like people like no one's really created a right wing competitor for Hollywood because there is a right wing element in Hollywood already. It's just that like if it goes away, then you'll have the Daily Wire creating its conservative
right, you have
films.
both sides
Like,
to like a certain topic,
yeah, exactly. Which
which can be good, but then
would
at the same time, if you're only looking at it from one side, then
exactly like it would be instead of all the like what you might end up having is like instead of all these movies circulating together, you're going to have theaters in like Yell County, Arkansas, are just going to show those movies. Like they're just going to show the Ben Shapiro movies, and then theaters in, but like you'd never be able to find those in Los Angeles. It's like what I was saying about country music. Like you can have these entire parallel music worlds, but like they don't touch each other. except through
I mean,
Like
she's
Taylor Swift
she's
somehow bridges the
country
gap.
too.
Yeah, exactly. So like she manages to be in both mainstream, like the mainstream Los Angeles music industry and the country music industry. So like she manages to ride the line there, and that's I think
Transcend.
part of. Yeah, exactly. She's transcendent, and that's why I think that's part of why Taylor Swift is so
Yeah, because
successful.
she caters to like different audiences and different crowds as opposed
Yeah,
to one niche.
yeah, and that's part of why R. Kelly was successful because you know he'd make all his raunchy club songs, but he'd also make like you know I believe I can fly and that sort of thing, and he makes all the music for like weddings and graduations and shit, but he still makes his raunchy club sound, so he managed to transcend it that way, and that's why he was I think that's part of why he was so
It's good and
successful.
bad at the same time. It's I mean not it's kind of similar to like what Tyler Perry did.
Oh, you mean like how Tyler Perry kind of
Made his
created
own
like
studio.
black media outside of
Yep.
Hollywood, like
Yep.
in yeah, that's fair. Like so yeah, working outside of working outside of the Hollywood system definitely has its advantages. Yeah, as you see with Tyler Perry. The difference is that like you know America is 13% black, but it's you know 45% conservative. So like it could be bigger, and I think the reason it's not is because Hollywood kind of fills the niche itself already, but that might
Right.
change. Yeah. So yeah, it's tricky to see what will happen. Like I think this is where the Daily Wire is headed. I just don't know how successful it will be. I think it has huge potential and huge dangers in that like it could blow up and become huge, or it could just kind of like live off the Hollywood scraps of B movies that never quite made it, and like you know
Right.
C-list celebrities for whatever reason who Twitter decided that week we're gonna
Right.
get.
Do you think in our social media world that people should be accountable for what they say? And do you think like she should have been fired, or it depends on the context?
Well, you know it depends. My point of all this was that like you know whether or not they should be held accountable, they won't be. Like it's we have to like if we want to enact change, we have to see beyond. We have to look beyond just getting people fired from TV shows because it's not enough because they'll just end up in their echo chamber media like that. That's just what's going to happen. But like to an extent, like I don't like I wouldn't want to be fired for what I say generally. It's tricky. It's tricky
Right.
because you know everyone says stupid things all the time, and I don't necessarily think you should never work again if you say something stupid once. On the other hand, like if you're a celebrity, like you influence a lot of people. So if you say horrible things, like a lot of people are going to take it to heart, and a lot of people are going to see it, and you know that's dangerous. You know, it's one thing. It's one thing to like express a political opinion. It's another thing like to do something like perpetuate COVID conspiracies because like you know supporting one political candidate
Is one thing.
it's tangentially harmful, but like supporting COVID conspiracies is very directly harmful. Like, and if you're a very followed celebrity, it's going to very directly hurt people. So I think it's wrong to fire people for being, like I said at the beginning, like deplatforming. I understand deplatforming because of all we went through with fake news, like with the bombardment of fake news, and how we learned that it's probably not true that the best ideas rise to the top. So we have to, you know, fight it in other ways. But yeah, my point is not necessarily that it's wrong, though. You know, I do think she was wrong to compare.
Being a
Like,
Democrat to
I think it's wrong to compare.
Holocaust.
Yeah, like the current political environment to the Holocaust, to like compare yourself to a Holocaust victim when there's no real call for that.
Right, and I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
there's There's probably quite a few Jewish people work at Disney,
Yeah. Well, apparently Ben Shapiro's not offended, but
but he doesn't work for
yeah,
Disney.
exactly. Well, and it's more. I think more importantly than like making sure that people, people who express certain views don't work. I think more important than that, like, is changing the society we live in, like changing the minds of the people who support those views. And I think there's probably a better way to do that than firing one of them from a TV show, because I think in some ways, preventing people who express those views from working will kind of legitimize a persecution complex that people have. But
Yeah,
on the other hand, like, if you keep them around, then they think they can just say horrible things. So I don't I don't really have all the solutions. Obviously, um, I think we've seen kind of the limit to where deplatforming can take us, and we need to work on something. Like, we need to focus more on changing the law, changing how society itself is structured. Like, Me Too and getting people fired, people with sexual harassment allegations against them fired from their jobs in Hollywood, was like, I think it should be obvious to anyone that if you're a rapist, you shouldn't just be fired from your job. Like, you should be in prison. And getting people fired from their job was a reaction to, the fact that, okay, maybe we don't have the power to put these people in jail, but we can sure as shit get them fired. And
yeah.
but beyond like, we need to look beyond that, like, in terms of, like, not see firing people as the end in and of itself. Like, we need to make sure that, like, people who blackmail sexual favors out of people in Hollywood go to prison, or at the very least, people can, like, win restraining orders or lawsuits or things like that. Like, it's not like getting people fired isn't essentially alternative justice, but like, I think our
You need
focus
to go
should,
deeper. Yeah,
yeah, our focus needs to be on, like, actual justice. Like, and in Carano's case, like, she didn't she didn't kill anyone acting as a police officer, but that's, like, the real problem. So, I not that she shouldn't have been fired. It's more that, there's deeper issues to deal with, and
to address. Yeah,
just firing people isn't going to cut it. So yeah, that's my take on the whole thing. Like, that like, the Daily Wire shows us, like, that getting people fired or deplatforming can only take us to a certain spot, and then we won't be able to go beyond that. We need to, like, we need to look beyond that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Got a lot of work.
Yes, we do. And that's the trouble. It's easy to get kind of symbolic figureheads. It's symbolic victories are easy. Like, it's easy to get representational villains fired and get them, and win these small victories, and it's much harder to win big but important victories, like, like police reform, reforms to sexual assault laws, resources to prosecute those guilty of sexual assault, support for victims. Those are difficult, and they're not as satisfying, and it's a slow process, but it's more important.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, in her case, like everyone believes in freedom of speech, but as long as you say what they want to hear.
Yeah, pretty much. Or like I said, like, they don't the deplatforming view becomes
Yeah.
more predominant. And it comes from a fear of what happened in the last 6 years, which, and I understand. I think people are going about it
Yeah.
the wrong way. So yeah, there's some tough shit going on.
On top of COVID.
uh
All right, I think that's going to end it for us. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You can find us on all your favorite podcast platforms: iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and don't forget to check it out on social media, podcast_above on Twitter, and the Above Average podcast everywhere else. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, you guys.